Hi everybody, Shay here. I decided to make this video to talk about something that has been bothering me for a while. And that is that ongoing debate that has been going on in the addiction community for far too long. And that is a debate between whether addiction is a disease or if addiction is a choice. This debate has been dividing up a community of people that is supposed to be a source of support for people's most vulnerable and worst times of their lives. Addicts that are new to recovery most likely have hit rock bottom, and they turn to our community for support. And in turn, they get the ongoing bickering back and forth between the people that think addiction is a disease and people that think addiction is a choice. In one corner, you have those that believe that addiction is a disease, and why wouldn't they? Society still believes in the Just Say No and the DARE program that was initiated by Nancy and Ronald Reagan back in the 1980s because of the crack pandemic. In the other corner, you have those that believe that addiction is a choice. They believe that addicts simply just choose to use drugs and that addicts that do so are foolishly self-destructive. And there lies an implication that all addicts are just simply bad people, that they can't be saved, like we're just soulless creatures wandering the earth with no type of morality. With advances being made in the medical and psychological fields, we're learning more and more that the disease model doesn't fit addicts and alcoholics anymore either. The 12-step programs like Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, they believe in the disease model of addiction. And to say so otherwise is almost this immediate emotional threat to their beloved program. So if addiction is not a disease, and if addiction is not a choice, then what is it? Well, I say it's neither, and we're going to get more into that after I roll the intro. Hi everybody, Shay here. Welcome back to my channel. And if you are new here, hi, welcome. My name is Shay and I have 22 years of active addiction, and my clean day is October 10th of 2016. And if it makes a difference, my drug of choice was opiates. So is disease an addiction or a choice? And I have said previously in the intro that it is neither. To say addiction is a choice is just too simplistic of a term. Choice is not objective, logical, or even rational. Our brains are not rational. People often do things out of context, motivation, moods. There's a litany of reasons why we make the individual choices that we make throughout our day. To a certain degree, addiction is a choice, but it is a choice that is motivated by strong emotions, or they're due by constraints that is been put on by deep learning. Choice is just not correct. It's just not a correct terminology to use for addiction. Addiction is a developmental phenomenon that slowly grows into addiction. So what do I mean by developmental phenomenon? Just like I talked about in the video of my addiction story, I went through the cycle of negative emotions that I personally went through in the beginning of my addiction. I grew up very naive, and I had a very naive, childlike mentality when I first started using drugs. That childlike mentality was there when my very first not so good thing happened to me that took my virginity. This would be a perfect example of the strong emotions as well as the deep learning that I was just talking about for addiction being a developmental phenomenon. These strong emotions and that deep learning is what drives people to choose drugs, so to speak. At the time in which I picked up my first drug, I had zero life skills and even less emotional maturity. Turning to drugs was a relief. It was an escape from the traumatic events that had happened to me at the time, and my naive childlike mindset had no capability of handling the traumatic events that was going on with me. And even though I still lived in my parents' home, I had no parental guidance to guide me through that. So it was almost like a natural choice for me to make because of the deep learning and strong emotions that I was going through at 15 years old. I learned at a young and impressionable age to abuse substances if I wanted to feel anything other than the pain that I had lived in at that time in my life. Nothing else provided me from relief from the turmoil that my life had become at that age. Nothing. And just like many addicts, we all share similar traumatic stories. Some are way worse than mine, others are not. Some of us, we start off our addiction with experiences like PTSD, depression, anxiety, those type of mental illnesses. And because of that, it is often easier and cheaper to turn to street drugs than it is to go to a doctor and to obtain your prescription the correct legal way. NIH says addiction is a chronic disease. The word disease is a medical term, and typically if you have a disease, you have to go to treatment. And here lies one problem with that: the cost of treatment. Rehabs and medications for people that are seeking to recover from their disease of addiction are not able to financially pay for rehabs or treatment centers. And those government-funded treatment centers often are a long waiting list for addicts to get into them. So if you do finally get them through the door and you get them to complete the program, 30, 60, 90 days later, they're back out in the streets with not a whole lot changing in their life, and they're back relapsing. It creates a revolving door of treatment. Rehabs become a revolving door of treatment because they don't always work. I attended rehabs multiple times. I believe within less than a 2-year span, I went to rehab 7 different times. Most of those times were just so I can get a break from the streets. I used to call them an oil change. Occasionally it was because the law had forced me to be there. But what doesn't work about rehabs like that is they take away your freedoms. They take away all ability to make choices for yourself. And I understand the basis of wanting to constrain a new recovering addict from making certain choices so that you can guide them, but to take away all ability to make choices come with feelings of powerlessness. Taking away all abilities to make choices for themselves compounds with feelings of helplessness and despair. You bring that in with people that are already walking in with problems, it just walking in the door of treatment with problems, it just spells disaster. Hey, sorry, I had to stop for a second and grab my notes. And the reason why is because we're about to get into what exactly is going on with your brain. And I want to make sure that I have the terminology correct. So if you see me looking down, that's because I just really want to make sure that what I'm saying is exactly what I wrote down when it comes to this part, because it is the medical portion of what's going on with your brain. And again, I just want to make sure I get this right. So addiction includes a very strong compulsive property So when you're addicted for a long period of time, the psychological process moves from an impulse to a compulsion. When you're a teenager and you're just like hanging out with your friends and you're experimenting with drugs, that's an impulse. Now, the reason behind that impulse is situational, whether trying to fit in with the crowd or means to escape difficult pain or trauma like I did. That's just an example of what an impulse is. So when following the impulsive drive to use for a long period of time, for some people, they cross that line into addiction. Once addicted, the drug turns into a compulsion. So that constant compulsion becomes a disruption to your neural pathways. And that's what the medical community would call a pathology or a disorder. Addiction is a disorder, just like OCD, anorexia, not a disease. This is where I'm going to start explaining the science of what's going on with your brain and why I believe addiction is a developmental phenomena and not a disease and not a disorder. I mean, not a disease and not a choice. It is just a developmental disorder. When you use drugs, dopamine releases through your midbrain up to your striatum. All right. The dopamine is a chemical messenger, aka the neurotransmitter that is used by our brain's neurons to communicate with each other. So you're releasing that chemical through your midbrain up to your striatum, and your striatum is within your prefrontal cortex. The dopamine in the brain is usually involved with regulation of movement for the cognitive process, such as maintaining attention, memory, and motivating behaviors. Dopamine is also the primary neurotransmitter that is involved in that reward pathway. Drugs that stimulate the secretion of dopamine tends to be addictive. So that's what gives your brain that rewarding sensation, that high feeling that you get when you're abusing drugs. The striatum is one of the oldest parts of our brain, and it is meant for seeking out goals. It's designed to focus on a goal, and it produces motivations to attain that goal. Meaning when you're a young kid or early teen living in a challenging environment and then you turn to drugs, that immediate relief is what drugs is providing you. And it makes sense to turn to that when you don't know the healthier options to go to. When drugs are being used, you are in effect rewiring the synapses in your brain. The more drugs that you're using, the more those synapses are being rewired and they become stronger. And these are the reasons for those obsessive thoughts, like being obsessed over when you're going to have your next fix. For me, it was, am I going to have enough blow to last me for the next day? Will I have enough to save for the next morning, because I had to have a morning shot of blow when I woke up towards the end of my addiction. That is the reason why, for those type of obsessive thoughts, you can see from the thoughts that I was having as an addict that I lost perspective. My moment by moment living when I was in active addiction was only for obtaining my next drug, my next fix. All of this is taking place because the pathways have been strengthened because of the long-term abuse that I have done. I abused drugs for 22 years. Our brains, my brain became very hyper-focused on my next use, and everything else just did not matter. We lose interest in our loved ones, our hobbies, old friends, anything that used to make us feel good about ourselves. All of that falls away and you become hyper-focused on nothing but obtaining your next drug. So if all of this is happening to the brain when you're using drugs, what is happening when you're not using drugs? Well, in effect, it's in reverse. Those pathways that we had once strengthened by abusing drugs, they slowly start to become weaker the longer the time span there is from the last drug use. The more time between our last drug use, the easier that it gets. And this is true as you stop strengthening those synapses pathways. Those weakened synapses that have not been used, they will start to revive, and your cognitive thinking processes will slowly start to come back again. You'll learn to identify thoughts, which are an urge or a craving. You'll learn new skills, you'll learn new habits, emotional intelligence, self-regulations, everything needed to live a healthier, happier, productive life. You will relearn not to be so compulsive anymore. Now, that conventional rehab is not working. Help needs to be open and available to all addicts at the time in which they are reaching out for help. It is imperative that we are helping addicts at the exact time when they have a strong, true desire to change their lives. Not having money or insurance should not be a reason to turn away anybody that is in desperate need for help. It is only when us addicts are absolutely ready to stop the turmoil that is in our lives, are we ready to embrace a new way of life. Until you reach that point, nothing else that can be said is going to help you. It is only at this point can we effectively produce change in a recovering addict. It takes a strong, solid, ironclad mindset to be able to defeat your addiction. Every single person who has a chemical dependency on drug or alcohol that have turned themselves around have this exact same mindset. Especially in the beginning of not using your drug of choice anymore, addicts find themselves battling not just day by day or hour by hour. This is a moment by moment thing, constantly attempting to save our lives moment by moment, especially in the beginning. We fight to learn how to live our life in the terms of which our own individual lives are putting in front of us in our path. Each one of our stories, they may be different, and yet there's one similarity between all of us, no matter what our individual beliefs, and that is we have all suffered in agony with our addiction. So can we please stop bickering over whether addiction is a disease or a choice, even if you don't believe that what I believe, that it is a developmental disorder? Can we just rally together and help each other and help the new recovering addict? Be the change in the world that you want to see. And I'll see you in the next video. Where you going? You was coming over here to talk to me when I was recording. You better come back over here and get some love, bubs. Yeah, that's my good bubs. All right, say bye, everybody.